Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I'm sure some people will wander in, but I think we'll kick things off right now. My name is Sue Ditta, and I'm the Executive Director of the Electric City Culture Council. And for those of you who don't know, the short form is EC3, and we're the city's Municipal Arts Council. So we deliver about 5 or 6 grant programs now and all kinds of other professional development services and festivals and special events. And doing grant workshops is one of our professional development vehicles and tools, because over the years we've heard from a lot of artists in town that they don't know very much about writing grants. That tends to be the kind of things you learn in art school. And a lot of our city's best artists did not go to art school or to fine arts programs at universities. And it is kind of a talent that people have to add to their baskets if they're going to be able to get money to fund their work. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been asked a number of times to do one that particularly profiled people from marginalized communities or backgrounds, because it can take a lot of courage if your work isn't part of the mainstream, if you haven't come from a mainstream art tradition, to write a grant, and you just might like to hear from people who struggled through some barriers to do it. And before we go any further, we'd like to recognize and honor the fact that we are here on treaty territory, Mississauga territory, and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, although that is disputed by some, home to the Williams Treaties First Nations. EC3 recognizes that the Williams Treaties First Nations have been stewards and caretakers of these lands for time immemorial, and they continue to do this work to this day. We're very grateful to be here, to have the opportunity to learn more about their knowledge and traditions, and we commit EC3 to supporting their work and doing all we can to further real efforts at truth and reconciliation, which includes providing support to Indigenous artists and creating space for their voices and their work to be seen, heard, and respected. And I was listening on the news to the dispute about looking for the young women who were suspected to be buried in the garbage pile outside of Winnipeg, and just found it so profoundly sad and disturbing. People's babies might be there. We can go 184 million on all kinds of ways, but we can't look for those babies. Then that maybe go to the website and look up how many of the 91 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee report have been fulfilled, and it's not very many. So if you find yourself with a spare moment, call your MP. MP's offices really pay attention to phone calls. Interestingly, even more now than emails. And let them know that you would like to see the government move ahead much more quickly than they have been on those 91 recommendations. And I think that's it for the formal territorial workshops that were acknowledgements. We did ask this distinguished group of people, and I've had the pleasure of knowing most of them for a long time. I've had a chance to work with them. Victoria is a new friend and colleague. She is a violinist who lives here in Peterborough, and brings a great deal of talent with her and experience with her, and also a different approach to funding her work. So she's going to talk a little bit about her experience doing that. William Kingfisher is an artist and visual artist, installation artist, performance artist to a certain extent, I would argue. I could write an essay that you're a performance artist. And I've had the privilege of working with William on our board, and he is a member of the Chippewa-Brahma First Nations and is an independent curator, artist, and we can't forget with William Gardner. And he's the founder of a project called the Get Again Project. We can tell you a little bit about. But William has also a great deal of experience writing grants for complex projects and is one of the Indigenous people in our city who had a lot of experience with formal granting and assistance. Nadine Changfoot on my left. Speaking the other day that I think you came to see me when the first year you were a professor at Trent. And you were writing an academic paper about community engagement with Peter girls. So we've actually known each other for quite a long time. Nadine, in addition to teaching at Trent, is a dancer and a video artist. And although, I don't know if you applied for OAC grants, but you've been part of really big grant writing projects for the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and often applying for things that are a little on the edge and a little on the margins. So we're delighted to have Nadine with us. She is currently on the EC3 board. Nick, have you been on the board, Nick?
I was on the first board, yeah.
First board, before I was with EC3 maybe?
Yeah.
Nick is a wonderful musician in his own right, and he plays with Leanne Simpson. Close enough. And he's really important for us to have here tonight because he's been successful with the Ontario Arts Council, but also in the music side of things with Factor and some of the more cultural industries granting agencies. And he's been on a similar panel like this. Jeff Macklin, who I've known and worked with for many years as well, is a visual artist, and his particular strengths and interests are in printmaking. He was trained at Sheridan College. He is Jackson Creek Press. You'll often see chapbooks and other things that say Jackson Creek Press. And you may have designed this logo. And he uses words as visual triggers. And I think he'll use some words as triggers tonight. I asked Jeff to come because...
You're not asking him
No, I asked him to come because while many of us know a lot of his work that would not ever raise an eyebrow or maybe make him nervous to apply for money for, some of his work is very clearly used talking about issues of gay identity and romance and experience, and that can make people really shy applying for grants, even in this day and age. So that's the sort of range of experience, and we're hoping that people could hear talking and hear language that made sense to them and gave them confidence, because I could sit here forever and tell you it's really easy to apply for a grant and get it, but these guys have actually done it. And then we'll have our little PowerPoint demonstration where we'll give you some of the technical stuff of the program. You'll be able to find that on our website afterwards, and then you can ask Alicia Rubashaw, who is our program coordinator and help put all of this together. You can ask us questions, and we'll take a couple of minutes to explain to you what happens after you push submit, and then don't hear anything for a while. Before we go any further, I want to say hello to Michael Morick, who's recording this for us tonight, and ask if everybody is okay with being recorded. This video will probably go up on our YouTube for people who weren't able to come tonight. But if you want to ask a question at any time but you don't want that recorded, just put your hand up in the air and we won't record that. Okay, Nick, Ferrio, say I want to get a grant.
Okay.
Make a DVD.
Sure.
DVD, I'll be all right.
And I was going to say, it's the next most cutting edge technology. No, a CD.
Yeah. So I mean, I've gotten a few grants. I've received an OAC grant, a couple of different OAC grants, Canada Arts Council grant, a Factor grant. But when I first was starting out, the big thing that was hard for me was the writing skills, and just like being able to, like, you don't have to be a really good writer to get a grant. But the thing was trying to express what I was going to try to make and why that was compelling. was really, I found that the first few I did really poorly in that regard, where it just wasn't coming across to the jurors like what I would wanted to do, right? And so I think like it's hard when you don't get the grant because you really wanted it, but you kind of got to keep just trying. But the big thing too is like, you know, writing about, you know, they always say write what you know or whatever, but like trying to write in a way that's comes across so that the juror can actually read it and understand sort of what you want to do. And one of the little hacks that I figured out is looking at the actual program and looking for sort of keywords that they use and kind of repeating those keywords back to them. So like I did this, I don't know if it's, maybe I'm jumping the gun because you're going to be talking about the EC3 program, but over dinner I looked at the EC3 program and looked for kind of keywords. So like in the mini part, there was a program of activities. So what is a program of activities? It's like maybe more than one activity. There's a section about research and development. So like maybe if I was applying, I would put in how this is gonna, you know, help me learn about X and it's gonna help me develop. And then there's a section about innovation and imagination. So it's like, how is this innovative or something? So just trying to write sentences that kind of repeat back what the grant body is looking for. Yeah. And then just the other things, like one thing I always struggled with was like, I'd make these huge, wild plans that were just like so elaborate, you know, like way over the top. And then there would be no real contingency on how I was going to actually, like, if I didn't get the full amount of money, how I was going to maybe make something happen. So like when I've been on a number of grant juries over the years, and one of the things we'd always look for was like, because there's a finite amount of money. So say there's like, for an OAC grant, say like 500 people apply and they give out like 10 grants. So it's such a small percentage, right? But everybody's trying to go for the same amount of money. So if there was a way that someone said like, if I don't get the full amount of money, but I get say 2/3 or 1/3 or whatever, this is what I'm going to do. It kind of showed that there was like resilience and there was like some sort of innovation to what they wanted to do. And they were willing to sort of sacrifice part of the project to see the thing actually happen and maybe use it as a way to sort of build. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it shows that you're thinking it through.
Yeah.
And you're not just going in blind hoping that you'll get everything that you asked for.
Yeah. And like, one of the things you said was like, try to reflect on what it was like to be a juror. Because I think that's like, when you're writing a grant, you don't really think about who's going to read it and what they're going to be, what their experience is going to be like. So maybe I'll just tell a quick story of trying to read, being on an OAC grant, jury. They bring you to Toronto and you'd have like, back in the day, you'd have like boxes of essays essentially, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these essays. And you'd be carrying this stupid box, like I'd take the GO bus with this giant box to Toronto and I'd be reading all these essays and I'd be like so overwhelmed. So if there was one that was like, hit me in a way that like stuck with me or like it just was easy to understand, it's like, George wants to make an album and his music is great and this is why it's great. And then like it was a lot easier to sort of like digest and then kind of like talk about it in the room because you're with a bunch of different people in that room, right? So yeah, and it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of work, so you kind of want to like respect the people that are on the jury as much as you can while still kind of like getting across what you want to sort of, you know, what you want to explore in your work. And it can be really, there was one thing you said too, was like, how does it feel not to get the grant? So like with Factor, I applied to Factor probably.
Can you tell them what Factor is?
Factor's the Foundation to Assist Canadian Talent on Recordings, I think. If that was the Jeopardy, I think I got it right. But yeah, it's like basically impossible to get. They make it as hard to get as yeah, it's just like, I think I applied like 15 times before I got
Wow.
it. And they would tell you things to change, and then you would change them, and then the next time they tell you a whole bunch of other shit to change. And you're like, well, okay. So it was just really tough, and it's like, yeah, it's hard, it's easy to get discouraged, but you just got to keep being like, no, I'm gonna keep trying to make my silly little album of music or my whatever I want to make, you know. And yeah,
And you were successful.
eventually, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
got it.
And that supported which?
The most recent one, which COVID totally killed, Television of Roses, but that's the way it goes, right?
Okay.
It's being an artist, you got to be like,
You win some, you lose
you win some, you lose some.
It's hard though. I just want to quickly say something about jurors, because for people who have been in the art world for a long time, this is something Alicia and I have been discussing a lot the last couple of weeks. We tend to take the words peer assessment and jury as very well known and understood among
Yeah.
a lot of artists, and I think it isn't. So when Nick's talking about a jury, or we talking about a jury, that means it's a committee of people that are brought together. They're selected for their expertise in the discipline, or to represent a certain age group, to represent a certain cultural background,
geographic too.
demographic background, but they are professionals in the field. They might be other artists, curators, art educators, arts administrators, but the idea is that your proposal is going forward to a group of people who should and will have been selected because we think they can read and understand a proposal from an artist, that they'll have sympathy towards the struggle of any artist and will give it a good, hard, and careful read. So I'm on the staff at EC3, Alicia's on the staff at EC3, but we don't make any of the grant decisions. We do put the juries together. And that's long and laborious work and happens after all the applications are in, and we do what we call an analysis of the competition, so we can see what kind of jurors we have to look for.
Can I add one thing that I totally forgot that's like probably it's not the most important, but it's pretty important. The budget is like, just like actually like making sure it adds up, and like like simple things, but like proofing your budget for sure. Like just having a budget that's like also not full of total BS. Like you can BS a little bit, but like not complete BS. Like I've seen some budgets that were just like incredibly like $7,000 on catering, and you're like, you're a visual artist, I don't understand. You know, or like whatever. But
they would get it if you were in film.
yeah, right. But it's just like, yeah, it's like the budget part that took me a long time to learn when I was first starting out. Was just like actually, you know, I'm a musician, so like contacting vinyl manufacturers, or like figuring out how much it costs to like host my music on Spotify and on the DSPs, or like what an actual photographer is going to charge me to take like press photos, or like whatever it might be, like, and really just like getting quotes from people. Like it's kind of businessy. It's
like a business plan.
Yeah, it
I'm in
kind of
business,
is.
and it's a
Yeah,
business
Factor
plan.
especially is businessy. It's so businessy. It's like kind of gross, but it's
It doesn't
hard.
have to be overwhelming.
Yeah, but you just really, it's just like, you know, it depends on which grant you're applying to. Like, I mean, I think the mini EC3 grant is like not super budget.
You don't have to really.
You don't have to really have that, you know, and there's like parts of the OIC, there's grants that you don't need to do that in the same way. But like when you're trying to do a project, having some sort of like, you know, and things change, like inflation and all that kind of stuff changes the costs or whatever. But like, you know, trying to like be mindful of that, I think is a big thing.
Definitely. I think we have a tips and tricks handout somewhere for people. You can pick that up on your way home, but it's also on the website. The good side of being adjudicated by your peers is that they're sympathetic and they're open-minded. The tough side is, man, if you lie or you pad your budget, they're on it like that. And I've had officers in training saying, well, how will the jury know
And I said,
They'll
trust
know.
me, they'll know, they'll know. You don't have to say anything, you never say anything, they'll know. They'll bring it up,
Yeah.
so. Nick, can I just ask you a quick question? Coming from an Indigenous background, did that influence your approach to things or your?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, my family was pretty working class. We didn't have a lot of extra money for basically anything. So like trying to do things has always been like working somewhere to try to pay for, like I would work an extra job to try to pay for music when I first came to Peterborough, you know? So like I worked
Coffee at the school?
I worked at the Spill, and I worked at there was a movie theater, and I worked here at Sadleir House, and while I was in university, and the Spill job was just to pay for like trying to make records and like make like recordings, whatever we were doing. It wasn't records, it was like CDRs. But yeah, it was like, you know, so I think that's a big part of it, and like, you know, I never had like great equipment growing up. I always had to like really work hard to get that equipment. And as you know, like a lot of grants, you can't apply for capital purchases. So like you got to figure out other ways to get those things. Thanks to Long and McQuaid for their financing. But yeah, you know, it's tough, but yeah, but you can do it. Just keep applying, and if you apply to a bunch of, the other thing too is like if I apply to an OAC grant, they ask, have you applied to other funding bodies? And so you can kind of like take one and kind of build off of that grant application and go, okay, I'm going to go to Canada Council with a similar kind of project, but I'm going to kind of fit it into their keywords. Do you know what I mean? And kind of massage it into that one, and then go, oh, I'm also going to apply to the EC3, and I'm going to like, and then you have three sort of pools of money that you might be able to access to make your project happen.
Don't put all your
Eggs in
hopes
one basket. Yeah.
Okay, thanks,
that good?
Nick. That was really great, yeah. Do you feel like
Sure.
you're ready to go? Ready to
Yeah.
rock?
Sure.
Okay.
Business plan is a big deal. It's like the, just, you know, keeping an eye on what things cost, you know, and keeping track of things. Keep your receipts. Everything's a write-off. Everything is a write-off. One of the things I wanted to say was about, coming at this as a visual artist, one of the things I struggle with is I look at the deadline, and I've had one little OAC show grant. What's that called? The local exhibition grant.
Assistance, yeah.
Yeah, and then, but it's definitely in my purview. I'm going to apply for this funding, I hope, too. But biggest thing I find is a stumbling block is I put things on my calendar and I have a deadline and I get there, but I realize often I haven't documented well enough. So I've gotten into a practice over the last 5 years of taking, I know it feels like we're always taking pictures, but take pictures of your own work and your workspace and all those things that are in the timeline of you making the work. I find when I have those in a deck my folder on my computer, it's so easy, you know, to show people what I want to do and to show the work that's been done. So document all the time, you know, not just what you post to Instagram. Keep a lot of it for yourself. Process. The other thing is, coming at this from the queer perspective too, is I was a late bloomer and everything. And, but that immediately became my story, you know, and I've dove into it fairly hardcore, and it excuse my language. In a small town like this, to kind of do this and reinvent myself, I'm not trying to make myself sound great, but it was difficult. But making that first chapbook that talked about me, because before that, you know, it's just I'm still boring. But I was a different kind of person, and I would never have thought of making a book about that, but it felt like I had something to say, because oftentimes we feel isolated in the worlds that we live in, but you very quickly will realize that there's a lot more people out there like you, and those books that I put out, and the messaging that I put out, and the visual triggers that I put out all the time attract people to me, and I've collaborated with people. So it's doing the things and getting your work out there. The world is changing all the time, you know. I'm hyper aware of the queer tone all the time. So we have to always be making work and putting it out there all the time, but we also need to be in these pools applying for these grants, and we need to be submitting our work to things all the time. Because if we're not doing that, we're not taking up the space that we need to take up. That's the biggest message, is make work and get it out there. as much as you can. And document. How's that?
So collaboration's been a big part of
Yeah.
your practice.
Because you're going to draw like people.
Take up the space.
I think that was most of what I had to say. But yeah, just take up space, basically.
Okay, so will this be your first time applying for an EC3 grant?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
But the other thing too is the community. You know, we could all write together. We could find people to help each other. You know, not everybody's great at taking pictures, or not everybody's great at writing the words. But my door is always open. You know, and I feel like a lot of the people I work with, it's the same thing. So it's not hard to find community to help.
So no shame in asking someone that you see at a play or at an opening
No.
if they'd be willing to proofread your grant or
No, I think
something
that's
like that.
really helpful for that kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Jeff.
no problem.
William, can you tell us a bit about your experiences applying for grants and
Sure. First of all, I'd like to just say thank you for inviting me. I think what really attracted me to coming here was you said that, you know, some people applying for grants, they feel a little bit intimidated by it, and that, you know, as people may be working a little bit on the edge or a little bit on the periphery, you know, and outside established contemporary art boundaries, or those looking to speak to social or political issues in their work or propose new modes of producing and presenting work, may feel excluded or isolated, and those concerns can be a big hill to climb for some. And that's really true, I think. My work has always been curating or working as an artist in Indigenous, in contemporary Indigenous art. And so, well, I started at the Canadian Museum of Civilization. It's now called Canadian Museum of History. This is back in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was there as a curator. And there it was, even though I worked in a, it was called the Contemporary Aboriginal Arts section, which was underneath the Department of Ethnology. And this is with Gerald McMaster. I worked there. And so there was a constant arguing about what legitimizes Indigenous art. You know, like, I found myself, after a couple of years, I became the curator there. So I would spend time talking about like where we are today and what we're trying to represent in our work. So, you know, I'd have to go in front of a board. And as a curator, what you do is you not only put together shows, but you collect works for the institution. And so I woed get a lot of pushback. It wasn't legitimate. It wasn't. They didn't trust it. So I constantly had to do it. So it really gave me a lot of skills in talking about like what we're concerned about today. Why is that important? Why is our art important? Like, what are we trying to contribute? What do we want to contribute? What do we want to speak to each other about? So that really gave me a lot of tools there. And from there, I moved back to Ramham, which is where I'm from, which is near Aurelia. But I started going to Trent here, working on a PhD in the Indigenous Studies Department. And there I started working in the theater there, Nojum First Peoples Performance Space. And I started working with Maury Mumford, and we had to put together large grants. And this was for the programming for the year, so it was a lot of little projects. We often worked with Heritage or Canada Council and the Ontario Arts Council. And this was before everything was digitized, which I have problems with how everything is digitized now, but I think it's much more efficient because we used to do, well, they were pretty thick grants. They were like this, and we have to do 6 of them because they go to 6 jury members, right? And so we had like 12 projects for the year. So we'd have to have, that was our support material. So they were about this thick. And I remember going to you'd have to go to the post office and post it before a certain time. And they were like, it was a lot of them. But now it's all digitized, which is good because you know when the dates are, when everything's due, and you've got the grant, you got the application in front of you, so you can start working on it, you know, and set up a file. Like I'm speaking about like Canada Council or the Ontario Arts Council. You can start early. You can set up your file, and you can start answering the questions. And the questions are usually always the same, even if they say they haven't posted that particular competition for that particular grant, and say you've got 2 months before you know it's due, because they always tell you when it's due. But say they haven't posted it yet online, you can still guess the questions because they're always the same. They're pretty much always the same. You know, they're always going to ask you about, okay, describe your project. So you can start doing that. You'll always have to put together a budget, so you can start doing that. Like, say you want to travel somewhere for your project, you can start, you know, gathering that information. You know, if you need to rent a car, well, you can. How much is that? And things like that. You can start doing things a little bit early, and it's really important. I found that it's really important to start early because you want a lot of time to edit. You want a lot of time to, because you know, it's easy to, when you start, you just put down everything. And then so when you're starting to write your grant and you're starting to answer these questions, what it really does, and I always find this to be a really fascinating process, is it starts to clarify, you know, because you have to talk about it, you know. And I think that at the beginning, when you just have these ideas, those are just like, I think of them as doorways. There's the starting of your project. It's not how your project's going to end. So you kind of have to leave it a little bit so that it's, you know, it's a little bit flexible, your project. Say, you know, you're investigating something. Well, sometimes you got to follow it a little bit. But then that happens when you're working on the grant and you're having to answer these questions. Like, there's always a question like, how is it going to help your practice? What is it going to contribute? And so that for me is like the question. What they're asking is, why is it important to everybody? Why is it important to you? So how does it fit within the discussions going on? So you kind of have time you want time to kind of work with that a little bit. And of course, editing is really, really important. I always have someone else read it. You know, I never, ever do I. Because for me, I'm writing it, it's perfectly clear, you know, but
Too close.
you know, yeah, you're too close, and you think, oh my God, you know, because you tend to take things for granted. You think these connections are there when sometimes they're really not. I'm always surprised when I give it to somebody and they come back and say, well, I didn't quite see that leap there, you know. I go, oh, you know, so. And you have to remember that when you're giving it to jury, when you send it in and it goes to jury members. They're all in the field, you know, like Sue mentioned. They're all, you know, professionals. They're not just random people, but they've been put together. But they don't know your project, and so you just kind of want to lead them. Sometimes you find yourself repeating things in the grant, and I think that's okay. You say it a couple of times. You say, well, I already said it over there. Well, you know, it's okay to say it again, maybe in a different way or coming from a different. So I think those are some of the things that I've learned. Yeah, I worked on many different grants, small project grants to large heritage grants with institutions and partnerships. Partnerships are nice. When you can partner with an institution like a gallery or something, and you'll do the work, but you'll have the show at their place. Like I did that with Art Gallery of Peterborough, and we did a large show called Arthur Schilling: The Final Works Show. Traveled to 5 different places. We partnered. We went after our heritage grant, which are huge and are really complicated. But we all worked together. We all took a little piece of it, and we kind of put it together and kind of edited it many times. And it was around $300,000. Well, it was over $300,000. But you know, once you get that grant, then you're free to, you know, to do your work. So let's see. So what I learned back at the very beginning with NOJM, working with First Peoples, is writing grants is work. It really is. It's a lot of work, but it's really fulfilling, you know, because you're working on your project that you want to see come. So So just give yourself plenty of time. That's one of the important things for me is, and I've learned over the years, editing is really important. Even if you've written some really beautiful stuff, and as the project is developing, as you're writing it, and you wrote some really interesting things over here, but they don't quite fit, don't be afraid to get rid of them. But use it for later or something. I always have a file that I have that I call extras or for grants later. But if you've worked on something.
Another way of saying this.
Yeah, that's you don't want it's. You can use it later, and I have done that. I've gone back, like when I'm just starting to write a grant, I'll say, okay, what have I thought about this? And I go, these areas I can kind of develop a little bit. And it's always nice to start from a little bit of writing rather than a blank slate. Blank slate is kind of gives you a little bit more, a little bit more work into that one. So I think the biggest problems I've had is legitimizing my work as an Indigenous person, saying these are concerns and these are legitimate. For instance, the latest project I've been working on for, maybe the last six years or so, is I've argued to granting agencies that the gardens that I want to do it's actually a curatorial space. And through my arguments, I've actually gotten funding for them, and I've been able to bring in artists and do lots of work from that. But it's allowed me to continue with my gardening, but it's allowed me to kind of really explore that really deeply, like what gardening is and how do we think about it and talk about it and things like that. So no matter what you're proposing, it's interesting because there's lots of things that can be considered art today, but you just have to argue for them. There's lots of things, and I think jurors like to see that you're taking a little bit of chance, but you've thought about it, and you've thought about it really carefully and are able to kind of put it into an interesting argument. I always look over the questions and the requirements numerous times, because it's easy to once you get writing, you see that it kind of helps you clarify it. Like you look at the requirements for each section, like with Canada Council, they have a creating, sharing. Okay, what is it? I got it written here somewhere. Creating, knowing, and sharing section. The art for and culture of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And what they have in there, they have these guiding principles. So they're really letting you know what they're looking for in the grants. So that's a really good clue for me. And they even give you definitions on what they mean by creating, what they mean by sharing, or what they mean by knowing. Like how does your project fit in that? So you kind of touch on that a little bit. That's always really nice. And the final thing is I'd say really enjoy the project that you're working on. Like find something that really touches you, and it'll really show in your writing because you're excited about it. And don't be afraid how it changes a little bit as the project develops. Your excitement for the project will show in your writing, and it'll show that you spent time thinking about it and developing it. And I think that's really important. I've seen many works. I've seen many grants. I've sat on many juries. I've seen grants where it's almost like it's methodical. Okay, we're going to talk about these, and it's not that interesting.
You don't feel the passion.
Yeah, you don't
sometimes.
feel it, but you can really feel when someone is, and you kind of, even if the project isn't as developed, maybe I kind of go for that. I always tend to, as long as they've thought about it, and then I always tend to. And the thing is, don't be discouraged if you don't get the grant. Keep, use it as experience, and don't get too discouraged, and use it for, to work on the next one or the next round, because they're every 6 months or something, 3 to 6 months. So those are some of the things that I've learned and have thought about in my grant writing. So thanks for listening.
William said the word that people sometimes don't want to hear in relationship to granting programs, but it is a competition. So it can range depending on the funder from 1 out of every 10 people getting a grant to 1 out of every 3 people getting a grant. I think we're at about 1 out of every 3, aren't we?
think at least last year's grant writer audience was like 50-50.
50/50, that's pretty good.
Which is really good, yeah.
So that's why your passion, you're letting the jury hear your voice. Everybody's talked about editing. I always remember Cameron
It is.
Bailey, who you may know is the director of TIP, in a workshop like this saying spelling matters. Maybe it shouldn't, but when you have to read 150 applications and they're all full of terrible spelling mistakes, send it to someone you know who's a good speller. Don't just use spell check. And those little things help. But that's also something to remember if you get turned down, to not give up, because it's not that they hated your project, it was just that there was another one that they ranked even more highly than your project. Keep that in mind. Thanks, William. We'll let the crowd ask you questions, but I just want to go to Victoria now. So you have taken a slightly different path to get funding to support your practice, and tell us a bit about that.
All right. So my name is Victoria. I've been freelancing as a musician since the 90s. I've been working full-time as a musician for the past 8 years. So a lot of people ask me or wonder why I can do this full-time. And I think one of the most important things for me through my career is that I've always had really clear goals. So it's like, this is where I want to be. You know, in the 90s, I was like, this is where I want to be in 20 or 30 years. And that just governed every single decision I made, to like not owning a television for 20 years. And like, you know, things like just like putting all my money into, you know, those capital expenditures or like those investments in myself. I also have like as a gigging musician, I have like this trifecta decision triangle, which is pay, people, and music. So anything that I am offered has to meet at least two of those things. It either has to pay well, has to be good music, or with people I really enjoy being with. And if it doesn't meet at least two, then I say no. You know, it can be like shitty cover music, but with people I'd like to hang out with and pays really well. I'll do that. It can be like, it can be like really awesome musicians, really fabulous music that pays like a little bit. I'll do that, you know, but I won't do something that pays like crap, is bad music, and that is with people I don't like. So, and then the other thing is that I'm not afraid to invest in myself. A person that I met, actually, I think I was sitting, you know, in the audience of a panel similar to this, of people saying like, this is what I'm looking for when people are applying to Showcase or whatever it was. And they're like, if you don't have good photos, good documentation of your work, and you haven't shown me that you've invested in yourself, why do you expect me to invest in you? So it's really important to like over time, right? Like I said, that's the long-term goal. So like over time, I know everything that I'm doing, I need to document, I need to like make things look nice, that sort of thing, right? So like sort of building your portfolio and your assets. At some point, I also hit the threshold of having to register for HST, which is like an income threshold, although you can get an HST number at any point if you so wish. I've never tried to hide my income from CRA. I think a lot of artists are like, I work a job, I'm just gonna like do everything cash and like not report it, any of that income. For me, it's worked out really well because, you know, I'm seen, like because I am a registered business, sponsors or other business partners that I approach see me as a more legitimate business concern. It was also like, well, I'm also contributing to CPP for, you know, the day that I retire, I'll get some money out of it. It's also been a real blessing in disguise, especially through COVID, because I had that history of being a profitable business. Then I qualified for small business recovery grants, which a lot of artists couldn't necessarily do because they didn't meet those thresholds in registration, et cetera. So I got a couple small business recovery grants, a RAISE grant, which was for downtown businesses that were in downtown cores, and I happened to rent space downtown at King and George here. The Starter Company Plus program when I was in Grey County, and also my biggest funders in the past 3-4 years have been in tourism grants. So I've gotten grants from the Bruce Gray Simcoe Tourism, and then most recently from Kawarthas Northumberland Tourism, and then also corporate and municipal money. So for me, that type of money has been a lot more useful because it's like right away and for a project. Whereas I found one of the biggest barriers personally for OAC grants or Canada Council is like, you can't start any work until this application is approved. And we're not gonna tell you for like 5 months. And like, well, what am I still wanna work, I still wanna write music and like, yeah, like I wanna still record and like do these things. I don't wanna wait 5 months and then maybe or maybe not get this money to do it. So, so I've been like fairly successful in getting those business and tourism grants. I've been completely unsuccessful, to be very honest with you, in getting arts grants. So I have been funded by OAC and Canada Council through other applicants that have applied to fund me as a featured artist. That's the closest I've gotten personally. But every time that I'm applying for a grant, and like I said, I've been doing this since the 90s, so like I used to, you know, when I was younger and had a lot more energy, I'd apply to like all the grants, and it was really time consuming because they're like, and that was when you had to mail it in, and like it was like that thick. But the process taught me a lot. So again, going back to like having that goal is like, this is what I want to do, and this is where I want my craft to be going. Does applying to this grant get me there? Like, or am I inventing a program to fit in this grant? And if I don't get the grant, is it something that I'm going to do anyways because it's towards that goal? Or is it something that I just wasted my time on because I had no real interest in doing it in the first place, right? So I feel like I didn't come to that realization until like a few years into writing a lot of unsuccessful grants. But like William was saying, you know, like the whole grant application process should be empowering to you. Like it should be clarifying your own goals and your own projects. And whether or not you get the grant, it has helped you clarify those goals and like what your project is. Because it's almost like writing a business plan, right? Like you wouldn't go and open a small business with no idea of what you're doing, who your audience is, what your product is, all that stuff. So if I don't get the grant, I'm still ahead. And I'm also building my portfolio for future grants. And always, I want to protect my artistic integrity. So as a musician, I wrote this. This is slightly, a slightly different point. Like as a musician, I'm always, again, trying to invest myself and in my art. So like, I still take lessons. I still go to workshops. I still do professional development. I practice a lot because like I want to become better as a musician. And the more I invest myself into my craft, the greater audiences I reach, like the more successful I am at grants. Like everything falls from your content, right? Like I think in this age of social media and all this BS, like we're kind of like, oh, I could be a star for making a 6-second video, but at the end of the day, it's you know, as artists, it's about what content we're creating, and like it needs to be authentic to us because audiences see through that really, really quickly. I've also been on a couple panels. So I've been on an adjudication panel for a music scholarship, and then also for the Mississauga Arts Council awards, and then also selection panels for orchestras. As my colleagues here have been talking about their experience on juries, like you get like this massive, now it's like on my computer, I get this massive amount of files, and it's like, just put yourself in someone's shoes. Like, can you put all your stuff in one file instead of sending me 5 files? And like, if you're gonna send 5 files, could you start the file name with all the same, you know, with your name, so that they don't get scattered in my entire inbox? You know, and when I'm getting a lot of applications and there's very few that will be successful, I'm going to look for the quick ones I can discard. People that had incomplete applications, people that are sloppy, that didn't present their work well, people that didn't answer the questions that were asked, or spelling errors, no. Like, I can take that one off, and then I have more time to spend on the other applications. So don't give the jury an easy reason to discard your application. And then, like I was saying before, show that you've invested in yourself. So take time to make your materials presentable, look good. Because again, you are asking someone to invest in you. So you show that you've invested that time and the effort in yourself. Yeah, I think that's all. Go ahead.
All
Thank you.
very good advice, Victoria, thanks. I mean, there are some themes that are coming up over and over again in terms of giving the jury something to hang on to, and I think it was you that said give it to them up front, and I sometimes think of it like we're taught, in high school when you're first being taught how to write an essay, and you're supposed to put in the first paragraph kind of an executive summary. Yeah, that's right, that can really make you remember the top bun, the meat, and then the bottom bun. It can really make a difference. We use a slightly more complex process in the sense that eligibility and completeness will be determined before the application even goes to the jury. Alicia does most of that work. But definitely anything that's going to irritate the jury, hold back. I can't tell you how many, I worked for town council for 12 years, applications that you get where the artist starts out saying how shitty the Canada Council is.
Not a good
No jurors ever pick the best grants, and it's like a challenge, and they're pretty good about it if they see a fabulous project, but you don't want to count on that to be the case. So spelling counts. Nadine, thank you, Victoria. What else counts in a grant application?
Oh gosh, I have been taking notes on my phone because I've just been loving what I've been hearing. I'm going to probably take a slightly different tack. For myself, I had to really explore what rejection meant to me. I took it very hard when I didn't succeed. And in part, that might have come from some kind of success prior. And I think what I do is I read, I try to take in what artists are saying, such as what I've been taking notes here about what our artists here have been saying. And I listen very carefully. So one gem that comes to mind is director Alanis Obansewin. And she said that you have to know yourself. You have to know yourself as well as you can. And it's always a process of learning and relearning and renewing, as well as some kind of falling apart that occurs in a creative process. And that is part of the clarity as well, because you are writing your own text of yourself. And so journaling every day around what, I don't know, it could cover the whole gamut, but hopefully some of our creative work will enter into that journaling process. And you already then start to have some material to look at and have the benefit of seeing yourself over time and seeing how you've grown and developed. As you know, I'm thinking of investing in yourself. I think that's very important. The ongoing clarity. Rejection to me, I think I was very fragile. I thought, I guess I'm not cut out for this. I guess I can't do this. But then I think what happened, I've been very blessed with some amazing coaches and teachers as well as colleagues. And I've also from my reading, I learned it's really important to become indifferent. And one, there's multifacetedness about disappointment, but part of it is indifference, but maintaining the dedication and commitment to yourself as a growing and practicing artist, and working toward that clarity and to want to persevere. Because improvement does happen if I am listening to my colleagues and if I'm listening to the feedback that I do receive. And that can be hard, to be honest with oneself as well. And I think that having a community, I think that's been shared here. It can be hard because not everyone wants to be, not everyone will invite me to be part of their community. Not everyone wants me to be part of their community. And that's okay, because as I've learned from many artists and researchers, that's happened to them too. And so what do? You just keep working to find your people. And so you see me as I guess I'm what you would call an established researcher. And so there is a community, and now I have the opportunity to really nurture and mentor and nourish younger creative minds and people. So you'll find your people. Just keep looking, keep asking. I think the work ethic is super important, and I think of one of my coaches in movement, and he basically said it's work ethic that makes the distinction. You may not see it today or tomorrow, but it's the ongoing practice and the commitment to yourself. And I find myself renewing that time and time again. It's doing the work. I met someone, actually, they were saying they work from 7 a.m. to noon. And then I thought, oh my gosh, what is my practice? So sometimes my practice gets a bit, how would you describe it? Loose. And then I meet someone in the community, and I think that's a really good wake up for me to think about, what am I doing in terms of my own practice, just to check, just to become self-reflexive, to put the, how would you say it, self-examination with a focus to, I guess, renewing and to restating goals. So I'm thinking of Victoria as well. In terms of, community, work ethic, clarity, and then also having served on juries and also committees for grant applications, I think it's really important to remember that it's when it comes to the boxes or the digital files, I recognize all the hours and hours and hours that go into those applications, and I truly wish they could all be funded, especially the very best. And so what happens is, as I was also coached, it's very fine distinctions between the applications, especially the strongest ones. So let's say, I don't know, let's say 50 or 30% can be funded, but then, there's the 40, 60, 70%. And it's very fine distinctions having to do with what everyone has said. And I think, in terms of the quality, my sense is knowing yourself and sharing that genuine excitement and passion for your work that is supported by, how would you describe it, research. The research may not go into the application. However, that kind of expansive learning really comes across in a strong application. Because someone, just by the way they speak of their work and in terms of the context, you can tell that they've done enormous amount of reading and thinking and reflecting to be able to bring it all. It's
Bring it
really
all
bring
the
it
time.
all. Yeah, bring it all. And that I say bring it all. 3 words. And at the same time, the meaning within those words is, in an application, it becomes an art. It becomes an art in itself. So I think that's what I want to share with. Yeah.
Thanks, Nadine.
Cheers.
Some good new ones and important ones that I just to give people encouragement, I want to follow up on. Nick, I'm thinking of a jury in particular that you were on, where you're. This happens in a couple of our programs where you get down from maybe 40 applicants to a top 3 who are going to be competing, but only one of them is going to get the award or the appointment. You know, it'll be 92.1 versus 92.2.
Yeah.
And as the facilitator of the jury, it's my job to keep everybody building consensus, being kind to each other, trying to put it out on the table. People have to give up a little sometimes to get a little bit more later on. So again, we've had a couple of people lately talk to us about the fact they didn't get the grant and it made them feel that everything they did was terrible and they should give up, or that EC3 thought what they were doing was terrible and they should give up. And I want people to leave here knowing that that's not true and to try again in the next application, because it gets so tight. We rarely have what we call, 5 unanimous no's. If there's 5 jurors, it's always that big bunch in the middle.
Yeah.
You'll have some unanimous yeses, unanimous no's, and it's that big bunch in the middle where you're ranking every
Totally.
single tiny point.
I remember doing an OAC jury, and you graded everything like out of, I want to say it was out of 5 or out of 10 or something, but the percentage that was above 50% was 75% of the applicants. So everybody was like kind of in this, like, there was not very many that you were just immediately like, that's not going to get it. There was like a section, like everybody was kind of in this like between 75 and 60 or something. So and then there was obviously the really exceptional ones, but there was like a big chunk that were, so it's really tough, and it's hard if you're like, I remember when you're going through it and you're like, especially because the OAC, and I don't know if it's the same with Canada Council, I think it is, but they try to find people that represent not only like communities but like geographical locations. So there was like sometimes Peterborough artists that were on that, and I'm like trying to go to bat for like whoever that's like right there, and I'm like, come on, man, they need like 0.5%. That's like, it's just so tough, and it's and then you're like you can't tell them anything because you're like sworn to secrecy.
You're bringing back all kinds of funny memories for me, that's for sure.
Yeah,
People would come in from Alberta. Artists in Alberta typically did not do as well at the Canada Council as artists from Ontario or BC. Academics study this. They discover it's because they don't get funding at all 3 levels of government. So it's much harder to build your portfolio, to get some projects under your belt before you're competing with people at the national level. And so then watch the artists from Alberta come on and think, no, none of this work is as good as anybody else's. And well, then they have good discussions and debates. The other thing I wanted to comment on quickly was community. So a lot of people will ask me, how do you get on a jury? It can make a difference whether you go to events, whether people get to know you, whether people You know, if I call and say, do you know so-and-so's work, would they do well on a jury? Can they chat with people? Can they interact and handle it when things get tense? Go to events. Even if you don't know anybody, follow the different organizations on Facebook and go to their events. We're really lucky in Peterborough, most things are free. Many have pay what you can options, so you have good opportunities. And the other thing is that you kind of build community, you get well known, but also I did have someone who's a very successful now visual artist call me. They'd been away for a while and came back to Toronto and didn't know how to get back in the scene. So I said, well, where you live, there's got to be 6 commercial galleries and artist-run centers right near you. Start going to the openings. Start eavesdropping on conversations. Go up to somebody who's looking at something that you like and chat with them. And to make a long story short, this person, as you mentioned, was not great about writing about their own work, but he could tell that this guy that he met at the event and bought a beer for was good about talking about his work. And so I got a call back saying, okay, could I ask him to write something about my work? Is that legitimate? And I said, absolutely. You know, it's one of the hardest things about this system, which is great in some ways, is that you have to have good writing, even though you're not necessarily a writer. Yes, can I pay him? Yes, you can. Okay? There's nothing in the ethics or guidelines of any arts council I've ever worked for, and I've worked for tons of them as a consultant, that says you can't pay someone to write your grant or help you write your grant or edit your grant. And you do what you need, and I often tell people to use this technique, get someone to interview you, because a lot of people can speak better about their work than they can write about their work. And you can have them take notes or record it, and that can give you a foundation. So
one of the things you mentioned too was getting out in the community. And I've been on the board for ArtSpace for 12 years, and I was privy to those grants that we wrote all through these years. While I didn't do the writing of them, I was reading them and providing feedback, but it provided a tremendous amount of insight and makes me feel more confident in writing my own. But also volunteering and getting to know people
Really good
and working
point.
in the scene. Get in the scene.
I did get asked the other day by someone at the New Canadian Centre if we would put someone on the jury who we didn't know. And I had to say, unlikely. If nobody on the EC staff, the EC3 board, if we call the heads of different organizations, so we have to have some confidence that the people we put on the jury, well, aren't crazy, can work with others, and have the ability to negotiate and discuss. So yeah, going on a board or a volunteer committee, helping with a fundraiser, any of those things can advance your career and help you be more successful, even though they may seem like outlier things. So I think the next step, we were gonna let you have a chance to ask these folks questions, take a quick break, and then we'll run through our PowerPoint that has some of the technical aspects of this grant program.